It's unmute. Oh, sorry.
Okay. Right, welcome back everybody to the afternoon session of this predetermination hearing for the Hurlie Substation application 2024-1951. I just thought it would be a good idea for me to just go over again what the purpose of today's meeting is for the benefit of anybody who may be either joining us in the room for the afternoon session who wasn't here this morning, or who may be joining us online who wasn't with us when I went over this earlier today. So just a reminder that the purpose of this hearing is to allow councillors to hear from and question those with a stated interest in the application. Are we having problems with the sound before I continue? Can somebody just confirm in the online environment that they can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, okay, thank you very much for that. Thank you. So the purpose of this hearing is to allow councillors to hear from and question those with a stated interest in the application. And to remind everybody that following the hearing, a planning report will be circulated to the Kincardine Mearns Area Committee, along with a note of this predetermination hearing. And a special meeting of the Kincardine Mearns Area Committee will be convened to consider that report, and the area committee will then forward their views on this application to Infrastructure Services Committee for its consideration when determining the application. So that's just to underline the point today that we are not making any decisions today. We're here to listen. We're here to ask questions of those of you who have put in valid requests to speak. So I would also add that I'm aware that when it comes to it, obviously, we'll be looking at material planning considerations when it comes to the report down the line. I know that hearing for those online is not that easy. So for those of us with microphones, if we could just move them a little bit closer and speak into them very deliberately. Similarly, for any of our requests to speak this afternoon, if you can bring the microphone relatively close and both speak into it and speak up, because it's not automatically carrying your voice to the back of the room. Again, I guess I would just want to repeat that I want to create a safe and respectful environment for everybody who's participating here today. Very much rely on everybody's cooperation to achieve that. And I thank you all for the morning that we've had. In the main, that went without any big issues around that point. So I'm appreciative of that. So ahead of us, we still have, in theory, 7 people who have put in requests to speak off the back of valid representations. And so our next speaker is Mr. Andrew Ritchie. And if Andrew is here, if I can invite him to come and take a seat. Mr. Ritchie, as you know, you've had 10 minutes to speak. I'll turn off my microphone. If you could turn yours on when you've done that, and I will then start the clock when you start speaking. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Andrew Ritchie. I live in a property 500 metres from the north side of the boundary, the site boundary. I wish to make objection for the proposal as submitted. I will discuss my reasons under the following categories. I consider these comments and opinions are important. Application context. Hurlie Substation is not a standalone development. It has never been planned as one. It should not be considered as one, should not be approved as one. Consideration of this application should only be made determined along with adjoining substation projects. These associated projects are already at an advanced state. TWP Bowden for pre-submissions already with Aberdeenshire Council, and will be making the application for consent within the next few weeks. Accumulated development must be assessed, not just the first part of the jigsaw, which gives no clue to the end result. should be no different to requiring a master plan for a large housing development submission. Chapelton can be used as an example, where the complete development is required to be planned and approved, even though the final completion may be 20 years away yet. As an architect with 40 years' experience of submitting planning applications to this council, which have always been meticulously checked before processing, I find it hard to accept that in this case there has been no demand to the applicants to submit their full development. The other two substations are planned in forest land within the red boundary line for this Hurlie submission. At all stages of the consultation, and seen throughout the submitted planning documents, SSEN have attempted to divert attention away from the development that is ultimately proposed and instead keep focusing on only one part of it. Approval of this part will open an unobstructed door for the other parts which will follow. The SSEN Hurlie submission is only a small part of what is ultimately intended, and while it is a vast area in itself, the adjoining substations which will serve offshore connections will triple the development size. Choice of site. In the submission, great emphasis is made on site selection and alternative options. Clearly, there have been no alternative locations considered other than Hurlie. National planning policy encourages brownfield development, but this has not been considered, even though there are possible site options. Initial consultations were based on the fictional siting of a far smaller development near Arbuthnott. This aroused great public concern, but was a deliberate ploy to detract from the plan to remove a vast area of forest where they expected less public concern. I recently found the National Transmission Network Plan, which shows current and planned routes and facilities. It shows 2 offshore connections to the Hurlie location, and the date in this document predates the consultations that were centred on Arbuthnott. The Hurlie site was announced as a result of consultation feedback, but without giving the public any further say on this, the choice was final. At the initial public consultation for Hurlie, SSEN took great pains to deny other infrastructure would be sited in this area. Accumulated developments. To follow a path of least resistance, SSEN have avoided informing the public of the full proposals. As repeatedly described in statements, the Hurlie substation is required as an intermediate part of the Taylor to Contour transmission line. What has not been said, but is a true reality, is that the purpose of the substation is to allow offshore wind farms to connect into the national grid. It is a connection hub for other infrastructure to plug into. It's already known that TWP will locate their Bowden substation also within Fettlesser Forest on an adjacent site north of Hurlie, but within the red boundary line shown in the current submission. Added to this, SSEN will also construct another substation for their own offshore wind farms. This will be next to the TWP site, also within the red boundary area. These developments have not been acknowledged as having effect within the cumulative development. The cumulative effects report is dismissive without substantiating matters. The report is incomplete and inaccurate. Prior to this planning submission, a scoping report was submitted to Aberdeenshire Council in October last year for the TWP Bowden project. No reference to this project was included in the SSEN submission. This is a serious submission, and insistence should have been made by Aberdeenshire Council for SSEN to include this before any further consideration was given. The failure to consider the other known developments is an attempt by SSEN to make fools of the public and the planning system. The offshore substations which are being ignored are the very reason this Hurlie substation is required. The whole development is taken into account. Area of rural landscape lost to industrialisation, which is threefold. The other substations will be located to the hilltop and hillsides facing northwards to Rickerton and the Slug Road. The location will not allow screening by landscaping or tree planting. This makes the simulated visual appearance entirely inaccurate and misleading. If consent is granted for this Hurlie application, then these large industrial developments will get automatic consent, regardless of the impact or effect on the local landscape and its inhabitants. This is not how a democratic planning system should operate. Public access to Fettlesser. It has not been acknowledged that Fettlesser Forest is a well-used and popular location for recreation that provides a valuable resource for locals and visitors. The amenity value of this area has not been recognised. It was claimed that pathways would be provided to replace any removal of existing tracks or loss of access. The plans do not show these, nor is there any assurance given that routes will be retained during and after construction. It is fair to assume that public access in this area will be permanently prevented or discouraged. Vehicular traffic using forest roads elsewhere is better to access the site will impact use by forest users, preventing safe use by walkers, riders and cyclists. This also has not been addressed in documentation. Loss of immunity. Added to the loss of public access, the loss of immunity must be considered. The value of woodlands and forest as an immunity available to all cannot be understated. This area is right on Stonehama's doorstep and is a precious resource which deserves full recognition. We owe it to our future generations to preserve this. It is effectively our own national park. Consultation documents misguidedly suggest that the area is of little recreational value. A statement shows how little notice has been taken of actual usage. This is a constantly accessed area used by walkers, mountain bikers, dog walkers, horse riders and families of all generations. Earlier this week, Aberdeenshire Council agreed to back a bid to bring the World Rally Championship to the North East. But this is an event which will need the full extent of Fetteressa Forest to make this happen. Loss of wildlife and biodiversity. These have been covered by others, so I won't cover that one. Loss of woodland. An increase in the area of trees, forestry and woodland is critical to achieving carbon reduction. But here the plan is to remove a vast area of established forestry without clear justification. They claim this replacement planting will be planted within Aberdeenshire. Currently, Scottish targets for tree planting are not being met, so it's hard to see how replacement planting can be done when other new planting is struggling. The forest report shows that they aim to plant the least number of trees as possible in line with planning legislation. There seems no intention, even given the national demand for more tree planting, to do the right thing and generously overcompensate for clear felling Fetteressa. But new areas of woodland planting cannot replicate the forest habitat and environment that currently exist, evolved over 18 years since Forestry Commission first planted Fetteressa post-war. Impact on health. Living next door to the Hurlie site, myself, my family, my neighbours are extremely concerned about the long-term impact on physical health and the constant impact on mental health due to close proximity to this and consequent substations. Noise, ENG and low-frequency vibration are all known issues. Little or no mitigation is proposed by SSEN in their submitted documents. This is not acceptable. Light pollution. Concerns were raised at a consultation stage on likely light pollution in an area where dark sky conditions exist. SSEN replied the only minimal lighting to control a building would be included and should not be of concern. However, the plans now show extensive lighting provision around the whole area, including over 100 floodlight towers. The extent of the proposed lighting in the submission will result in a great disturbance over a wide area. Visibility. Selected views of the proposal have been simulated. These cannot replicate the actual result. Views within the forest, which forest users will see, would show a large industrial complex with towering equipment. Impact could be reduced if the substation platform was to be lowered in level or split into terraces. This is a possible option which has not been considered. At the east end of the platform, the level is 25 metres above the existing ground level. The offshore substation to be sited to the north of Hurlie will sit on the hilltop and hill slope facing north and will be a very visible eyesore in a very scenic landscape.
You have 30 seconds, Mr.
Right. Noise pollution has been covered before. Basically, repeat what has been said. The fact is that we were told we would have noise testing done at our property. This was not done. So the noise report cannot be taken seriously. And traffic has been covered as well. Extensive traffic on the Swanley Road. Finally, hydrology, private water. Our location has been shown incorrect. The fact is, our water supply actually comes. Our supply actually comes from within the right boundary site and will actually be destroyed. 2 seconds.
Do you want to just give us the headline?
Yeah, the socio-economic assessment. The report is actually nonsense because it doesn't. It includes the other substation developments, which makes it difficult to accept that SSE and don't know anything about this regarding the cumulative developments report.
Thank you very much. So, We come back to members for questions. Just a reminder that we're looking for clear and concise questions, if possible, please, avoiding any move towards debate. And anybody who's not spoken yet as a member, could they please introduce themselves, their ward, and say whether or not they sit on Kincardine Rooms Area Committee and or Infrastructure Services Committee. Thank you. So, Councillor Carr, George.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, George Carr, Ward, and sit on the Infrastructure Services Committee too. Thanks very much, Andrew, for your presentation. You've raised a few points, but I would really like to direct these to SSEN and some of the points that have been raised. There's three I've got written down. First of all, Mr. Ritchie referred to the screening out to the north into Rickerton, which maybe as planners too, because they put up this morning some visuals as to how the screening would relate. Second point is the loss of amenity, but probably road access, which we didn't really discuss this morning. So obviously there are a lot of tracks through Bettwrexham Forest. They are used by lots of different groups and users. Certainly schools do their sponsored walk through Bettwrexham, or used to do anyway. And the third point is lighting for the site, and I suppose that's got to be balanced with security. So you might want to sort of just touch on the security aspect of it and the impacts on the environment related to security. So 3 points: the screening, the road access, and the lighting. Thank you. Sure.
Pardon?
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to come to screening last because I'm not quite sure what the question is. Come back. Lighting, I think we've already discussed already with Councillor Black as well. I mean, in terms of operational lighting, the site isn't lit on a routine basis, and there's only for security purposes or in the case of an emergency for maintenance. So, you know, there isn't a lit sign from that point of view. Road access, I think, was that in relation to recreational access for the forest or construction traffic access?
Yeah, sure. It would really be the sort of the road access for other users, and to make sure, obviously at this time of year, for instance, it's very difficult to do works up in forest tracks which are not very robust, but you know they can impact other users. If they're rutted and not kept up to standard during wet weather. So it would just be your comments on your proposals to make sure that the roads are maintained for other users, and mitigate the effect that might have.
So during the construction phase and for operational purposes, the tracks will be maintained throughout. We need to maintain operational access to the site. There's also the principal use of the site, which is an operational forestry plantation. So we'll have a relationship, an agreement with them to maintain tracks. In addition, any tracks that are getting taken out as a result of our development, we are replacing them. So that is in the planning drawings as well. And we're also proposing to upgrade an additional track. This is for recreational use, but also to maintain forestry operations in the Hills Hurlie.
And then, yeah, and the last one was screening. I just wasn't quite sure what the question was.
Yeah, I think Mr. Ritchie referred to screening to the north, which was discussed this morning as being adequate, but he was suggesting that that was maybe an omission in terms of being adequate to screen to the north.
Can you clarify what I mean?
You mean in terms of existing forestry that provides adequate screening at the moment?
Maybe ask Mr. Ritchie to clarify that point, and then they can answer. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, the point I made was, as it stands, the Hurlie application shows screening for its own enclosure. The point I made was the fact that we're not just looking at Hurlie here, we're looking at 2 other substations north of Hurlie. And it's those substations which, when they are done, or even construction starts, it will change the whole effect of the visualizations that we've provided, which we are made to assume that this is what the Hurlie station will look once the other developments start, have been completed, it won't look like that. But the other developments will actually be more visible from the north because you're putting them on the side of a north facing hill. So they'll be visible from the Slug Road. That's my point.
Okay, did you want to put a question to planning about the
Yeah, Chair, since it's been raised, it would be quite useful to hear experience about your visual impact to the north. This has been discussed. Thanks.
Yeah, so the landscape will have to be considered in the committee report. And I think it includes protection on cumulative effects, which is covered in the EIA and that will be considered in the committee report as well.
Okay. Thank you. Did everybody hear the response at the back? So the planning officer said that would be addressed through the EIA and in the report of handling when it comes to us at area committee. The issue of screening and visibility and cumulative impacts. Yes.
Sorry, I think I understand what you're asking now. I mean, I think the comments been made in relation to third-party developments. They obviously aren't part of this plan application in that respect. So we've adequately mitigated for our development, considered them to the cumulative assessment, but the actual developments themselves are not something we're involved in.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Turner, Alan, you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, Councillor Alan Turner, Stonehaven Road East Side and Chair of Infrastructure Services. Mr. Ritchie, you said right at the end, you talked about your private water supply, but I think because we're getting to the end of your time for speaking, like that's just a couple of questions in relation to that, if I may just understand the context. So what you said was your supply is within the red boundary, and you said you lose that supply. I'm just curious, does that supply just to your property or is that supply to others? Etc. And also just what sort of discussion, engagement has there been on that actual supply through the process up to now with either planning or SSEN?
Yeah, the supply, my own supply serves my house only. There's a network of underground springs which travel up the hill from my house and past the red boundary line. As far as I'm concerned, it's within the site. So there I have concerns about that. It's within the area that Bowden are proposing to place their substation. So if the Hurlie development doesn't already alter it in some way, then the Bowden one definitely will. And I've spoken to both SSEN and TWP regarding this, but there has been no real satisfactory response to that. SSEN have said that because of their hydrologist says that because we are north of the Burner Bay, then it shouldn't really affect. But I think they're muddling groundwater and rainwater with underground springs. It's a complex subject which most people don't get their head around. My feeling is that if it's a deep underground spring or a network of them, then any groundworks will actually affect that. So my concern is the loss of my water supply or the reduction in it of the quality or the quantity of it. But we can't take this. I feel that I personally can't take this as a acceptable risk. There's got to be some proposal. I can't wait till it dries up. We've got to do something or somebody does something, because as it stands, I've already lost, even currently, the value of my property's probably dropped by half because of where I am. If the water supply goes, then what value is that? It's things that should be addressed, and as a stakeholder, I would like to have thought that I could have been given some sort of reassurance, and that hasn't happened.
Alan, do you have a follow-up?
follow-up would probably be for the planning service to comment on, you know, if we bring water supplies. You know, that'll come back, I'm assuming within the report, you'll look at all of that, but I'll say welcome your comments at this stage.
Private water supply survey assessment was carried out with data from Applicant Council. And yeah, it will be considered in greater detail within the committee report.
Thank you. Can I ask if there are any further questions for Mr. Ritchie or for planning or the applicants in view of Mr. Ritchie's representation at this point? I can't take questions from the floor, I'm sorry. No, okay. Mr. Ritchie, thank you very much for this. Now, my next speaker is Tina Morrow, but I'm not sure if she's been able to join us yet. No. Is it the same for Shirley Morrow? Same. Okay, we will, if they manage to join before the end of the meeting, we'll simply take them at the end. In which case I'm going to move on to Ian Thornton Kemsley, who I believe is also with us this afternoon. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Thornton Kemsley. When you're ready, I'll turn my mic off. Thank you.
Chair, councillors, thank you for the opportunity to speak about this substation application. Now, there are quite a few things that you've already heard about that may be wrong with this proposal. I certainly don't wish to try and break over that ground, but they all have been addressed in the single objection document submitted by the aligned campaign groups in respect of Hurlie, but also in the overhead line objection, which we have heard today from SSE, is inextricably linked with this proposal. Now, Brian Wake talked about the project being presented to the council as being dictated by ESO and Ofgem. From my own discussions and from written responses from NESO and Ofgem, they are very clear that they do not specify design, technology or routes. They simply define an endpoint and a capacity. It is important for the elected members to be aware that the original design submitted to ESO, for which this project was given ASCII status, was for an upgrade of the existing Teeling to Contour infrastructure. No mention of new pylons, no mention of new substations, either at Fiddis or Hurlie. This is SSEN's proposal for addressing the shortfall in infrastructure requirements. Not NESO's, not Ofgem's. There have been material failings in the application which has led to the need for further information to be already provided in respect of Hurlie. The root cause for the developer to submit this is the project description contained within the EIA and used to assess the project impact. And that gives rise to concern and draws into question how much we should place on what we have been told already. It is a statutory requirement under the Electricity Works Environmental Impact Assessment Scotland Regulations 2017 that the EIA identify, describe and assess in an appropriate manner the direct and indirect significant effects of the proposed development on land, soil, water, air, climate, material assets, cultural heritage, and the landscape. Those determining the application before them have a duty to ensure that all significant effects are addressed transparently before determination. Material failings such as the location of noise measurement stations brings into question the whole of the paperwork that you have already been put, that has been put in front of you. Now, that's nothing new. SSEN have scoped out agriculture in their September 24 scoping report and reiterated this in the ECU application. Their EIA identifies that only 4.98 hectares of land will be, of prime agricultural land, will be affected. That's based on an assumption purely based on the base of the substation, of the pylon. Doesn't address the other impacts that they know existed. How do we know? Because in an email dated the 6th of November 2024, SSEN's head of land assembly acknowledged that their design would have serious impact on agriculture, stating, "We have been in discussion with the NFU on this point. Designs are currently being reviewed. There is scope for potentially raising conductor heights further to accommodate combine harvesters." SSEN conceded that at this stage, it seems unlikely that the design will accommodate all types of high agricultural machinery. Now, they're continuing to say only 4.9 hectares are affected, whereas I can't get a combine under the 6 pylons on my land, and that will affect an additional 3 hectares of land. Now,
Mr. Kemsley, Mr. Thornton Kemsley, can I just remind you that we're addressing, I know you've said that they're linked to the overhead lines and the substation, but if you could focus on the substation.
I am,
If you're coming.
but I am indicating why you should look carefully at the EIA.
Understood.
What SSE have not done is look at the full cumulative impact of their project. They have acknowledged that that the Hurlie substation is to take these offshore wind farms, but they haven't accounted for these. SSE's, well, they have to a certain extent. They've identified further developments such as the Glendy wind farm connection, the Quittle-Bess, and Bowden, which includes further substations at Fetteresso, and as we've heard from a previous speaker, may affect the screening to this project before you. Although known to SSE, this application fails to address the further likelihood of other connections which will involve underground cables from across prime agricultural land from landfalls north of Stonehaven into Fetteresso, such as 1 gigawatt Aspen wind farm, which NESO have designated in conjunction with SSEN as the preferred connection point with underground cabling running from a landing site just north of Stonehaven. They also haven't addressed the fact that this project, the project before you, will involve a further underground cable, again, to a very similar landing point north of Stonehaven, and via underground cabling, which already has a provisional connection agreement in place with SSEN. This is a lack of transparency, and it is something you need to consider. And we haven't even talked yet about the Bellrock connection for a wind farm east of Stonehaven, which has a landfall near between Findon and St Cyrus. So the extent of the cumulative impact has to be addressed by yourselves in this application. To do it properly, it should look at the predicted expansion and maximum connections of all these wind farms, because that's what the Hurlie station is being put in to do. We've heard that from SSEN themselves. Now, my overall thinking is that the teacup project and the Hurley station related causes conflict with national energy, forestry and planning policies. It is likely to cause significant environmental harm, as you have heard, deforestation, biodiversity loss, flood risk, noise. Planting elsewhere with young trees does not address the locality of this problem and the local requirement to mitigate. We've heard that it inflicts socio-economic damage. Then there's tourism, flawed consultation, and ignored alternatives. It fails just transition principles. Therefore, this project should not be consented in its current form. We need to look for a holistic, high-level approach. We've got more to come. SSEN are already surveying a substation at Crago with a likely overhead line east of the Garvick, running through Aberdeenshire. This is one of a number of projects, and you must look at them all holistically. That's all I have to say, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. If you could pop your microphone up. So can I ask members, do they have any questions for Mr. Thornton Kemsley or for the applicant or the planning officers? Councillor Carr, George.
Thanks, Chair. Two questions for the planning team on the basis of what Mr. Thornton Kemsley has said. Firstly, where do we draw the line in terms of balance between looking at Hurlie in isolation and the cumulative impact aspect of it? You know, where does that line start and stop? Because we're really looking at Hurlie in isolation, in my mind. And the second point is about another point that was raised about offsetting biodiversity or planting to other areas within agriculture. What's the planning services view about that? So two questions. Thank you.
In terms of cumulative effects, the assessment of cumulative impacts is largely confined to those projects that are consented or already constructed. We can expect SSE to conduct an assessment against unknown parameters. So I would say that in future projects, so some of the other projects, Golden, etc., they'll carry out their own cumulative effects assessment, and these issues will be covered in those. And in terms of compensatory planting, sorry, what was the actual question?
Thanks, Chair. It was really in relation to offsetting, planting to other parts of Aberdeenshire as opposed to the locality where the maximum impact should be taking place.
Yeah, so we take a sequential approach to compensatory planting within Aberdeenshire Council. So ideally, it's located as close to the development site as possible, and then we would look for the planting to be within the Kincardine and Mearns area, and then if that's not appropriate or cannot be achieved, we look within Aberdeenshire Council boundary elsewhere.
Chair, maybe just maybe just come back to the first. Sorry. James.
If I may add what Stephanie has already said there. Just in terms of the first question that you raised around we afforded the cumulative impact assessment, to a certain degree that will be down to the decision maker as to how much weight they're going to afford each individual project. The advice the planning service would usually give would be if a project is has planning permission, obviously that attracts a lot of weight within the cumulative assessment because there's a lot of certainty attached to that particular development. If a project is at an earlier stage, but perhaps at an advanced stage, you can still give it a degree of weight. But as the level of uncertainty around a project increases, the amount of weight that you would give it within cumulative assessment would generally decrease. Now, the reason why we wouldn't necessarily expect an applicant to provide a detailed cumulative assessment on every single proposal in an area it will really depend on the stage of development. So whilst speakers have referenced several different offshore wind developments that may or may not connect into this location at a future point in time, because there's a relative lack of detail as to what those proposals would end up looking like. You know, what kind of structures would they include? Where would they necessarily be sited? That means it's not entirely reasonable to expect SSE as the developer to address that in detail at this stage. Now, where that cumulative assessment would come in would be when those subsequent applications come forward. So if an offshore wind developer were to decide to submit an application adjacent to the Hurlie substation, it would be on them to assess the cumulative impact as part of their application. And that's kind of where the weighting lies. So it's all about certainty. Our advice, certainly, if something benefits from permission, there's a lot more certainty, so more weight based on it. And as Stephanie has pointed out on the biodiversity netting and biodiversity enhancement, correct that our approach is all about encouraging mitigation as close to the site as possible. And we've just add to this that Scottish Government policy on the matter is not as nuanced as that in terms of Scottish Government policy and Scottish Government decision making. We are aware of examples where they have allowed mitigation to be undertaken across Scotland. That's something that we try to fight as a planning service, but the policy environment is challenging for that. But it is something that we would look at to control through conditions and have evidence that approach for that.
Just let's thank James for a very comprehensive answer on that question. That brings quite a lot of clarity on that. Thank you very much.
Yes, I took my hand down while he was speaking. I think the answer had been given to what I was going to inquire about as well. So can I ask, are there any further questions for Mr. Thornton Kensley or the planners or the applicant? I'm seeing no hands at this point, so then I thank you very much for speaking to us and for your representation.
Thank you, Chair.
So moving on, can I ask if we have Brian Mackay with us? No. Okay. In which case, our next speaker, who I believe is attending by Teams on this in this instance, is Mr. Mark Hope. Is that correct? Okay. Mr. Hope, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, not very loud. Can you just say?
I'll try and speak up a little bit. Is that any
well,
better?
just hold on a minute. If you will just do a sound test, we can maybe raise the volume of the speaker in the room. So if you could do a testing, 1, 2, 3.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, that's much better. Thank you. Can I ask you at the back of the room here satisfactorily? Okay. So Mr. Hope, thank you for being with us. When you're ready, you can begin your 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll try and be considerably less than 10 minutes. I really just, having listened to the rest of the meeting, I agree with most of the objections, and I'd just like to highlight a couple of the high points that I think have been raised by the last few speakers. And they come down to the fact, well, as we've heard, Hurlie only makes any sense in connection with the Kintore Teeling and with a series of assumptions about predominantly offshore wind generation. And as somebody mentioned this morning, SSEN have not demonstrated the need for Hurlie. Its need is dependent upon a whole series of assumptions that they make, some of which are within their control and some of which aren't. And it does seem absurd that the planners are not invited to look at the whole of a development, as would happen in any other area of planning, rather than these piecemeal, here's one piece here, which makes no sense without the other piece. And in the recent replies from planning, and I realize they're constrained by the situation, but to say the cumulative needs are going to be assessed each time a successive development comes forward seems completely contrary to the whole notion of what a cumulative need is. Because at this point, we know that this Hurlie development only makes sense with a number of offshore developments coming in and being brought on shore. And I've worked in the offshore industry for the last 40 years, and we have very highly developed technologies for laying cables offshore. It has far less environmental impact, far less social impact than the onshore cables that are proposed, with all of the consequences for the overhead power lines, which are potentially going to run pretty much from the Moray Firth through Aberdeenshire. And then the crazy thing is that this power is not needed even in Scotland. Scotland has too much power. This power is being generated in order to supply the north of England and further south. And we could run run cables from offshore. So the main area that seems almost certain to go ahead, wind farms in the outer Moray Firth, which are being brought on shore in the northeast of Scotland. And then we'll have 200 or 300 miles of these massive pylons going through communities across Scotland, but not least Aberdeenshire, in order to feed customers around Newcastle, Scunthorpe, wherever. Whereas the alternative, which is not considered by SSEN, would be to leave the power offshore, to take it down through cables and direct current networks, and then land it at a brownfield site somewhere near Newcastle, Scunthorpe, somewhere in that vicinity, which is where the demand for the electricity actually is. That would probably be much cheaper. In the comparators that SSEN have made, they're comparing the cost of burying cables onshore with the cost of pylons, and they assert that it would be much more expensive to bury. And that's probably correct. It would be an entirely different calculation if the electricity was carried offshore, and you would have none of the social and environmental impacts. Very few. You'll just have them where you brought the lines onshore in Newcastle, Scunthorpe, or wherever. But far less impact, massively less impact, and there is no comprehensive cost-benefit analysis within SSEN's proposal, and apparently it isn't necessary for them to get planning permission within the piecemeal process that is technically allowed. So I'll just conclude by saying I think there are a lot of detailed objections to this proposal, quite rightly, but the whole thing is unnecessary. It has not been demonstrated to be necessary at this stage. And it's plain that if you look at a holistic analysis of providing energy from Scotland, meeting the Scottish targets and the UK government targets, which I support in principle, but not at any price, and not carrying this amount of industrialisation into Aberdeenshire in particular, because this will unlock other wind farms, onshore wind farms. I'm actually sitting in Deeside in Banchory, but these are areas which should be areas of outstanding national beauty. They're recognised internationally as areas of pleasant places to live. And I moved with a young family 35 years ago to this part of the world and have never moved away. And many other families have done the same. And we're now, as the oil industry declines, focusing on tourism and visitors to this area. We are kidding ourselves if we think that if we industrialise the landscape, any of that will be at all possible. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for your representation, Mr. Hope. Can I ask members, do you have any questions for our speaker? I'm seeing no hands. I would have one, which was a question I nearly asked last time. So I'm just trying to get my head around the whole issue here of strategic planning when it comes to energy development, full stop. And I just wondered if you could say anything about that in the context of National Planning Framework 4 and how it drives or doesn't drive our thinking when it comes to the sort of application before us.
So National Planning Framework Board doesn't make a particular statement in terms of. I'll try and speak up. National Planning Framework Board does not make a particular statement in terms of strategic planning for energy development. There's a national project identified, which is National Project 3, which is about expansion of renewable energy and transmission infrastructure across Scotland. There's no geographic designation attached to this particular national development other than Scotland-wide. What this effectively means in terms of the planning assessment, we have to look at any application that is put forward in front of us and assess it on that basis. Because SSE have submitted a valid planning application to Aberdeenshire Council, we've had to assess the application that is in front of us in line with our responsibilities under the 2020 Planning Act. I would draw attention to section 25 of the Act, which means we have to assess it with due regard to the development plan and place significant weight on that unless material considerations dictate otherwise. So the short answer to your question, there is not a particular requirement for a development framework, a master plan, or a wider strategic approach to energy development.
Okay, can I just come back and get clarification there in terms of the role of the development plan? I'm assuming that we are talking about the Aberdeenshire local development plan having a really significant say over any application, an application of this nature, rather than National Planning Framework 4 necessarily having primacy. Is that correct?
So in referencing the development plan and the wording of section 25 of the 2020 Planning Act, the development plan is taken as meaning National Planning Framework 4 and the local development plan. So together they comprise the development plan. So both documents are to be utilised. Where there is a conflict between the documents, and particularly where there is incompatibility between the provisions of NPF 4 and the development plan, NPF 4 prevails as the more recent document.
Okay, understood. Thank you very much. So Councillor Ewanson, Marion.
Yes, thank you. Just following Mr. Hope's presentation there, a question for the applicant. So Mr. Hope made the claim that this whole development isn't actually necessary. And a second point, offshore cabling, was it considered? And if so, why was it ruled out? That's for the applicant. Thank you.
John. Yeah, would you like to respond?
I feel we've covered these quite a lot. Is there any nuance to that question to address?
Marion?
Yeah, it's just in response to the direct claims made by the last speaker.
So can I just clarify as well? So is the point here that you're trying to get at that Hurlie is to deliver is to bring to enable the transmission of the offshore wind farms, and therefore is Hurlie? Is your question as to whether or not Hurlie is needed if there was another transmission option, which is cabling, undersea cabling?
Yeah, and had they considered it? Yeah.
Have you considered it?
Whether the infrastructure is onshore or offshore, that is dealt with through the holistic network design and the holistic network design follow-up exercise. Both of those are led by the National Grid, by NESO, with the input from all the TOs. So then the initial holistic network design exercise, that identified what developments were recommended to be offshore, what developments were recommended to be onshore. We got a signal to proceed, indication from NESO on PCUP, which is the onshore development. So that is what has been recommended to proceed.
Yes. I'm going to bring in the monitoring segment.
Yeah, Chair, I was happy to allow the applicant to give a response back in relation to that, but I think again it would be good to make a point councillor uses query specifically in relation to the necessity of the planning application. Again, members should be aware of the necessity of the application is the material planning consideration. You have an application which is before you and it's assessing the application on its merits.
Thank you. Councillor Ewanson, I'll move on in which case, if that's okay, to Councillor Turner.
Yep.
Thank you. So Alan.
Thank you. It's more a question that came through my mind from the previous speaker. I thought about asking it then, but like yourself, I held off a bit. I'm not really sure. I'll ask the applicant, but I may also ask the planning as well for comment. It's like back into cumulative. And what I heard obviously from various speakers is the subsequent developments from offshore could be routed to Hurlie. I accept the fact we look at them differently, we look at them separately. But the question is back to, in some respects, why Hurlie? Who makes the decision where these actual things are tied in? Is that SSE or is it someone else? Be the first bit.
So
during the holistic network design development and the holistic network design follow-up exercise, these processes are led by NISO with input from all the TOs, and we contribute as an SSE and the other TOs contribute potential landing locations. So for the East Coast, that would include the site up at Peterhead, New Deer, Hurlie, and these are general vicinities, as one of the other previous speakers indicated, and they are correct. NISO and Ofgem do not determine designs. They don't do site selection. They don't do routing. That is entirely down to us. We've never claimed otherwise. So we propose these general vicinities, and NISO, through their role in the operability of the network, how they can manage it economically through power flows, constraint payments, making sure the power goes to the correct places, identify Hurlie or the vicinity of Hurlie as the preferred location for these connections to tie into. It also looks at the lengths of cables relative to, so they do look at as a holistic design, where are these offshore wind farms connected, what's the best coastal proximity for them to connect into, and how does that impact the dynamics of the network with where they tie into.
Okay, so I understand that NISO is where it's proposed that each separate wind farm would tie in.
Yeah. Just to clarify again, with semantics, NISO do not dictate to us what we have to do, but they can make recommendations that they are in the best position to make those recommendations.
Yeah, I'll leave it for just now. I think I'll probably pick it up at a separate point.
okay, are there any further questions, either for Mr. Hope or the planners or the applicant? So I'm seeing no hands. Can I just thank you very much, Mr. Hope, for joining in and for your representation and time. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to move on now to Angela Taylor, who I believe is also joining us online. We have her with us. Hello, Angela. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, and we can hear you. So I'm just going to get my timer. And I think you know you have 10 minutes to speak. So when you're ready, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for letting me speak today. I do live in Angus, but I have a very big interest in the whole TKUP. As you're aware, it's an integral part, Hurlie is an integral part of the TKUP. And my talk today is regarding the proposed substation and the planning statement in regard to this. The application gives a huge weighting to MPF 4 Policy 11, the energy policy, and uses it to upstage all other policies in the planning statement. However, this policy can only afford such weighting if mitigation against detrimental impacts is suitably qualified. Mitigation is, however, considered inadequate in multiple occasions. In some instances, the applicant said that detail will be given post-decision. This contravenes the essence of the gunning principles, as insufficient detail has therefore been provided at consultation stage. Policy 11E states that impacts on communities and individual dwellings must be addressed. A small number of dwellings to be affected are identified, but there's failure to sufficiently address the long-term construction impact on such residents. Construction will be between the hours of 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. 7 days a week. Landscape and visual impacts must be addressed. They are identified as significant, however, mitigation doesn't adequately address the impacts. Impacts on roads need to be covered, but as weights and widths of construction traffic have yet to be confirmed, the impact on roads cannot be fully measured or impacts given. The need to address impacts on flood risk has not been adequately addressed, as it must be recognised that the felling of trees in Fetaretto Forest and other areas will potentially increase flood risk. In addition, the requirement to address the impact on trees, which in this case is immense, has not been suitably addressed. Policy 11 must also demonstrate how the proposal maximises net economic impact, including local and community socio-economic effects, such as employment, associated business and supply chain opportunities. The definition of local and community benefits should surely be indicative of the area that hosts the infrastructure. A community benefit, by the way, has to be implied for it. It's not a given thing. The bigger economics report within the application gives an estimate of possible benefits, but shared across the whole of Scotland, whilst another figure only demonstrates the potential benefits and employment to be generated across the whole of Aberdeenshire and Aberdeen City. Now, Aberdeenshire itself covers a full 6,313 square kilometres. Elsewhere, the locality is defined in the application as either within a 50-mile radius of the site or the local authority area, not the actual area hosting the infrastructure. Now, addressing the NPF4, the Scottish Government CPO said in February 23, when the NPF4 was adopted, that it should be considered as a whole. However, this isn't what the application does. Only policies supporting the application are included, whilst others aiming to protect features of our rural environment are omitted, either partially or in whole. Now, time constraints don't let me talk about each policy, but very briefly. Policy 1 addresses climate change and clarifies that emissions from development are minimised. The greenhouse gas emissions from the manufacturing and construction process, however, will be great. In addition, the felling of trees which absorb carbon dioxide and the disturbance of soils will also release stored carbon, and this hasn't been quantified. Policy 6 addresses trees, woodland and forestry and complements the aims of Aberdeenshire Local Development Plans E3.1, 3.2 and 3.3. These local policies relate to the need to protect Aberdeen's forests for residents and visitors, promoting and supporting the forestry industry and protecting woodland coverage, presuming against such a large removal of trees. It should be noted that not only will trees be removed in the location of the proposed substation, but felling may be necessary on access roads to enable large equipment, the size of which has not been ascertained, to reach the site. Forestry policy aims are reinforced by the following. The UK Forestry Standard has a presumption that forest land should not be converted into other land uses. Meanwhile, Forestry and Land Management Scotland Act 2018 promotes sustainable forest management. Scotland's Forestry Strategy 2019 to 29 objectives include the need to improve the resilience of Scotland's forests and woodlands, along with an aim to increase the use of Scotland's forest and woodland resources to enable more people to improve their health, well-being and life chances. A priority is to ensure forests and woodlands are sustainably managed. Policy 3 addresses biodiversity, but with a proposal only supported if it conserves, restores and enhances biodiversity, so it is in a demonstrably better state than without intervention. Much of the mitigation suggests off-site projects, but locations and details are unconfirmed. Mitigation regarding on-site measures lacks detail, and no long-term monitoring or management plan is outlined to ensure mitigation comes to fruition. For example, at the Seagreen substation in Teeling, planned planting there has been totally ineffective due to insufficient monitoring. Furthermore, it must be questioned as to whether off-site planting 40 miles away can be classified as local. Policy 4, addressing natural places, states that national development proposals will have an unacceptable impact on the natural environment, will not be supported. Meanwhile, the Scottish Government's just transition commitment to environmental protection and restoration is to act within our planetary boundaries while protecting and restoring our natural environment. Again, as with policies 3 and 6, the lack of suitable monitoring to ensure the proposals materialise is of concern. The application mentions significant impacts on the landscape. The substation will be part of the proposed TKUP OHL line, and the cumulative effects of this must surely be considered together, as this also has significant landscape impacts identified. The impact on some species has not been fully realised, with some species scoped out of the application. Habitat creation programmes are mentioned by the applicant, but it must be appreciated that these will take a long time to establish. Policy 22 addresses flooding. The removal of trees in the forest increases the likelihood of flooding for multiple reasons. Trees absorb and intercept rainfall. By removing trees, there's a likelihood to increase runoff, creating soil erosion and a greater volume of sediment in roads, drains and burns. Policy 9 relates to promoting using brownfield and vacant sites and proposes that the development is directed to the right locations, minimising additional land take from greenfield sites. And this is echoed in Aberdeenshire Local Development Policy R2.1. However, the Hurlie location is located in a greenfield site currently used for forestry and recreation. The option of using brownfield sites has not been sufficiently explored by the applicant. Policy 14, livable places, is not adequately addressed in its obligation to ensure any development is not detrimental to the character or amenity of the area. Paragraph A states that development proposals will be designed to improve the equality of an area, whether in urban or rural locations and regardless of scale. Now, Policy 29, rural development, is omitted by the applicant. Within this policy, there is a requirement to protect forestry resources and the distinctive character of the countryside. Reference to Policy 23, addressing health and safety, is similarly omitted in the applicant's planning statement. In addition to safety concerns on the narrow country roads with tight bends and narrow bridges, the applicant has not suitably addressed the potential for oil leaks from transformers, spillages during construction, or the proximity to the main East Coast train line carrying petroleum and other hazardous substances. I'll briefly mention the Horlock rules, a set of guidelines for the design and siting of substations adopted by the National Grid, which advocate that environmental issues are addressed, yet the application fails to do sufficiently. The substation fails to fit in with the landscape of the area, and space is not used effectively by electing to use an air-insulated system rather than the smaller gas-insulated system, which would have minimised the impacts on the area. And I'll finish by asking for 4 things to be considered. 1, whether the NPF4 has been looked at holistically, as neglecting to do this disregards its aim. 2, whether both climate and nature crises have been addressed, as advocated by the NPF4. Thirdly, whether mitigation is sufficient, as failure to provide this takes away the weight attributed to Policy 11. And finally, whether the planning balance of an estimated potential economic gain to an area out with the locality hosting the infrastructure outweighs the detriment to the immediate rural environment and local residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just checking we had an echo. Okay.
Yeah. There you go.
I'm afraid we've just muted you to avoid getting an echo in the room. So if we do come back to you with a question, we'll need you to put your microphone back on. Can I ask members if you have any questions, either from Ms Taylor or the applicant or our planners today, given her representation to us? Councillor Carr, George.
Sure, it's just a question for the planners in relation to what Ms Taylor referred to, particularly in relation to species monitoring. I guess we're following national guidelines on the procedures that we follow for those. We just outline, how long we monitor the species that are present in those areas, and how intensive is that monitoring, particularly considering this is quite a big area that we're looking at for this application. Thank you.
I think your mic is still there.
Sorry.
Thank you.
No, good.
I will just say, I think that is a quite technical question from our point of view. We are really guided by our environment team ecologists on that. We will answer it as best we can in context here, but it's something that I think Stephanie will probably want to go away and look at for the area committee report. I think the only advice that we can meaningfully give today is the survey work that formed part of the environmental impact assessment submitted by the applicant has been reviewed by our environment team ecologists as part of the consultation that we undertook, and they have raised concerns within it. Stephanie will cover the specifics of what survey work is done within any report. Then just cross off that one later that time.
Yeah, thank you.
Just a quick question from me, possibly. Can you just clarify whether the concept of planning balance will have any role in this application?
Yes, it will be covered in the committee report.
Yeah, well, okay, thank you. Councillor Alison.
Yeah, for the planners topic, Angela Taylor mentioned a lot of things that I would expect to be covered in the committee report. She went through a whole list of policies. Can you confirm that they all will be in the committee report, or is anything there in that list that you weren't going to be rather me list them all?
Yeah, I think you've got it all covered in the committee report.
Thank you, Alison. Are there any further questions from members? No, I'm seeing no hands. So, Ms Taylor, thank you very much for joining us online and for your representation. We appreciate your time. Now, Ms Taylor was our last speaker, but we skipped over Tina Morrow, Shirley Morrow, and Bryony Mackay. Can I ask if any of these speakers have managed to join us? No. No. So in which case, I think we'll bring the meeting to a conclusion there, as they've not managed to attend. I know efforts have been made to contact them, numerous efforts, I believe. So it'll just be for me now to bring our meeting to a conclusion. So first of all, can I ask councillors whether they feel that they've received all the information they require? Yes.
Agreed.
Agreed. If not, could I ask you to raise your hand? That would be the easiest way. Councillor Turner, Alan.
I think the answer is yes, but obviously I would expect more information obviously to come in relation to obviously we expect that. Soon it's kind of it's a difficult question to answer. If you say yes, I'm expecting a lot more stuff to actually come as a result of some of the points that come, particularly obviously the committee report and everything, which you'll feel the stuff. Okay.
Yes. Absolutely, that's a valid point. I think it was just if there was any particular something that you felt hadn't been touched on at all today that you wanted to flag, that you would pick that up. So I'm seeing no other hands, in which case bringing the meeting to a conclusion. Can I thank everybody who has attended today for taking part, giving us your time so that we could hear from you. and have that opportunity to question you. I appreciate it. I know that I'm sure that my colleagues have done so as well. And just to remind you that the Kincardine and Mearns Area Committee is going to have a special meeting on Tuesday, the 13th of January, to consider the report of handling that will come from the planners to us. And we'll be being asked to give our view, which will then be sent on to Infrastructure Services Committee for them to consider, as they are the decision makers in this matter. So again, thank you very much for being here, and have a safe journey home. Thank you.